Hello and welcome to Religion and Life. I'm your host, Ozzie. Global Asian religions like Buddhism, Taoism, and Hinduism are familiar to us in the West, but there's another less familiar religion, predominantly in Japan, called Shinto. One of our religious studies majors, Claire Crane, studied Shinto in Japan this last summer along with Japanese Buddhism, and she's become our resident expert on those traditions. Welcome, Claire.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on the program today to talk about your experiences and to tell us a little bit about Shinto and the way Buddhism is appearing in Japan.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, I'm excited too. Occasionally we have students on, and this is a real treat for me, so appreciate it. And you are one of our stars, of course.
Thank you.
It's nice to have you here. So to begin with, just why don't you introduce yourself, how you came to be interested in religious studies, and particularly how did you get interested in Japanese religions?
Yeah, well, my name's Claire. I'm a senior at App. I have one more year though. And I got interested in religious studies in community college in my last year. I just took a lot of different classes on myth and world religions, and my grandfather also had like a vast interest and knowledge in religion, so I kind of grew up talking about different traditions. And then I saw the study abroad flyer last year, and I didn't know much about religion in Japan, and I wanted to learn more. So
that's a big jump.
Yeah,
that's right.
absolutely.
And you went with one of our professors,
Yes.
Dr. Mai, on the study abroad tour to Japan.
Yes.
And tell us about that experience. You were there for, what, 4 weeks, 6 weeks?
We were there for 3 weeks. I think we went to like 6 different areas. We kind of jumped all around, and it was really cool to see like smaller cities versus bigger cities, because when you think Japan, you think like neon lights and Tokyo, but there's also so many quaint little towns, and it's just very like homey places. So
did you spend most of your time in Tokyo, or?
We only spent 4 days in Tokyo. We spent about 2 to 3 days in each location. So we stayed at hotels and then one hostel, which was really cool.
Yeah.
It was a cool experience.
We were talking earlier, trying to guess about the population density in Tokyo, and we both underestimated 38 million people.
A lot of people.
In a geographical area the size of Los Angeles County. Mm-hmm. So that's why you were feeling so claustrophobic there.
Yeah, Tokyo was wild.
So what did you do for your study abroad? Did you go to classes, or were you mainly touring with the professors who were lecturing, or how did the logistics of the study abroad go?
It was a mix of lectures, tours, and readings. We had assigned readings for every day about kind of the area we were in, or like a historical event that happened that we were looking at based on like a physical location. So we would have the readings and then see the place and then have a discussion about it, and then we did reflection assignments based upon the sites and kind of the formulation of Japan and religion in Japan.
Yeah. So was the study abroad focused on Shinto or Buddhism or both, or just in general?
It was more so general. We talked about like how Shinto and Buddhism operate in Japan. We also talked about Christianity in Japan, and how that kind of interacted with, immigrants and traders, and we talked a lot about foreign influence. So
I know a little bit about these traditions. They're not my area of specialty by any means, but I know Shinto is an older kind of folk tradition. Mm-hmm. Buddhism came into Japan through Korea, I think.
Yes.
So there's a lot of interaction between those traditions. And then I hadn't thought about the influence of Christianity, but is this predominantly, you said through trade, Christianity comes into Japan, but is it also a missionary presence there as well, or?
Yes, a little bit. We didn't spend too much time on it, but it was really interesting because the Dutch brought a lot of missionaries in Christianity, and then there was a lot of martyrdom going on and total bans of Christianity. So the population is a little bit smaller, but when we were in Nagasaki, there was, you would see churches because that's where the trading port was. Mm-hmm. So that was really cool to see.
Yeah. So I know that you have mentioned, and I want to come back to this in a little bit, that Buddhism and Shinto in particular, I think, interact in some interesting ways, and that these two traditions create a cultural tradition that plays a pretty important functional role in Japanese culture. Can you sort of describe how that works? I mean, when I think about a religion and a culture, you tend to think about a dominant tradition, right? So we know about churches in the South, and we know the Bible Belt, and there are countries in the Mideast that are predominantly Muslim, for example,
right.
or Jewish. So this idea of amalgamation is a little bit different. Can you describe the way that works a little
right.
bit?
It's very complex. I don't think I would have understood it very well unless I saw it, but it's very much, it's almost like an unlabeled way of life. Just walking, like you'll see street side shrines and people will just make offerings and bow to the shrine and then go on about their day. It's very much embedded in daily life. And one thing I found really cool is there's no really distinction between how you would regard like a Buddhist deity versus a Shinto kami. It's kind of the similar ritual aspect of I think 2 claps and then bowing your head and clapping again to like summon the spirit and then make an offering or prayer.
And you would do this on the street, just a shrine on the street or an informal altar on the street?
Yeah, there were many. And then also at the main temples and shrines and like larger temples and shrines.
Okay. So you mentioned a word that I want you to define for us. You said Shinto kami, K-A-M-I.
Yes.
What's a kami?
Kami are, that's hard to define. They're, I guess you could say spirits or energies with specific functions. So there's some of the emperors like have been regarded as kami because they have like great power, and there's also kami for specific functions like Inari is the rice kami for like rice cultivation. So there's a lot of festivals around harvest to that kami to petition for prosperity in agriculture.
I don't think this is quite accurate, but would it be fair to say that a kami is like a deity of sorts, a minor deity, or an angelic presence, or?
I would say that's like a good comparison.
I'm getting close,
yeah.
but not exactly.
Yeah, I don't even fully understand it just because it is such a culturally embedded thing to grasp, and they have such a unique relationship with their understanding of kami, because it's very much just built into the universe. Like Japan is just made up of kami.
It's just energy.
Yeah, I would say
Do people have kami energy?
There are certain people who can become kami.
Okay.
So.
Okay. And then you also said that in addition to making bowing and reverencing kamis, that someone might do that to a Buddhist deity.
Yes.
Is that a bodhisattva, or what is that the right term for a Buddhist deity in Japan?
Yeah, generally bodhisattvas, because it's an all-compassionate being that has made a vow to help those attain salvation or help people in life, and they're just all compassionate, so you can turn to them for many things. But there are many Buddhist gods and bodhisattvas, and there's thousands. There's so many.
It is. Yeah, I don't know how anybody could ever keep track of everything. So, well, let's say you're walking down the street in Tokyo, or if you're not comfortable in Tokyo, you go in your mind to a smaller place, and there's a shrine. Okay, and you say that the devout person would clap twice to invoke the spirit, and then make an offering, and then clap twice again as an amen kind of. What sort of thing would that person be asking for, maybe?
It could depend on the deity, I suppose. So the one I did most of my research on, Jizo, that would be for, it could be prosperity, good health, fertility, well-being, and then there's deities for like knowledge, attainment of. A lot of them are prosperity based. You'll see like a bunch of Buddhas in stores. Oh, I forgot the specific Buddha that it is, but like every storefront has him for prosperity and like making sales.
A specific Buddha for prosperity. Okay.
And there are some for, like I said, educational endeavors or harvest or just certain life transitions, connections and love, things like that.
So there are specific shrines for Shinto kamis, right, and specific Buddhist temples, but it also sounds like these street side shrines can function either as a Shinto or Buddhist shrine. Is that right? And
there are shrines and temples that contain kami or bodhisattvas, because a lot of
both. Okay.
Yeah, I think we went to one shrine that had a Jizo statue who is a Buddhist deity, but they sometimes regard bodhisattvas as kami, or there's not really the need to make the distinction.
Right. Well, let's talk about Jizo. Right. I found this fascinating. I read the paper you're going to present in a couple of weeks at the North Carolina Religious Studies Association. Congratulations, by the way. It's a fascinating paper on Jizo Bosatsu. And as you said, he's a Buddhist bodhisattva, but he's been assimilated into this kind of cultural tradition of Japan. So he functions like a kami. And I want to come back to him. I want to talk a little bit more about specifics of these two traditions, and come back to Jizo. But just give us a little brief summary of this bodhisattva, and why did you get interested in Jizo? I'd never heard of Jizo, and it's Jizo.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. I had actually never heard of him either before this trip. Dr. Mai pointed a lot of the statues out. They're very easy to see. So there's a red bib and a hat usually, which symbolizes like protection, because he's regarded as the protector of children predominantly. There's many other functions. But yeah, he began as guardian of the underworld, and I believe that's still kind of the function he plays in other Buddhist countries and places, but definitely obtained a very unique identity in Japan throughout history.
So as guardian of children, you say, and women, or just, as guardian of the underworld, is he responsible for easing the transition of, let's say, children into the afterlife? Is that part of what Jizo does?
Yes, absolutely. He got combined or similarly regarded with a kami called dosojin, which is a kami of borders, and one of the borders is between life and death. So they kind of became synonymous in their function, but Jizo is believed to reside at the border between life and death to guide the unborn back to the gods, because they're seen as not fully solidified into humans, so they can kind of flow between life and death instead of having to fully repeat the cycle of samsara.
The unborn.
Yes,
yeah,
the unborn.
So if there's an abortion or a miscarriage or something, Jizo would help negotiate the fetus's passage back into the cycle of samsara.
Absolutely.
Well, that's fascinating. It really is. And that's the function that Jizo plays in Buddhism, but also kind of adopted into the Shinto worldview as well. Or does his function change in Shinto?
I don't think they really particularly make a distinction between. I know he's he's in Shinto shrines and temples, and Buddhist temples. So I think anyone can appeal to him for their needs, regardless of if they label their practice.
So I want to come back to Jizo, but let's talk just briefly about I know you said that Japanese culture doesn't really distinguish between Shinto and Buddhism, and that they've become amalgamated in some very interesting ways. But let's try to distinguish between them just for argument's sake, if we can, just a little bit. So Shinto is ancient, embedded into folk culture and into indigenous traditions, but has been incorporated into contemporary life.
Right.
By affecting everyday life, politics, culture, and so forth. Are there sacred times and places and rituals that can be identified as Shinto apart from the way it's amalgamated into culture and to Buddhism?
Absolutely. Weddings take place in Shinto shrines, so that would be like a life cycle ritual. There's rituals for certain ages, like age 3, 5, and 7 for children, because it was a really dangerous time. Historically, just with the high infant mortality rate. So that's like a very big, it's called the Children's Festival. New Year's festivals and agricultural cycles are generally Shinto festivals, or they're called Matsuri. So those are, I guess you could say, distinguished as Shinto.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you find these sorts of rituals associated with coming of age, for example, or life passages, in virtually universally in religion.
Right.
But they have a distinctly Shinto bent in Japan.
A lot of them are very focused on maintaining purification. So that's like a very big aspect, is just negotiating purity and pollution.
Yeah, you were saying earlier that when you went to a Shinto shrine, it was expected that you engage in this purification ritual. You want to describe that?
Yes. Yeah. So you wash your hands with just water, and the washing is it's symbolic for cleansing away, and it's also physically washing, and it basically allows you to be purified to enter into the sacred space.
What was the wedding like? I know you weren't a guest there, but you told me earlier that you witnessed a wedding from afar, right?
Very, very briefly. It was our first day. It was at Ise Grande Shrine, which is the shrine to one of the major kami, Amaterasu. She's the sun goddess. And we didn't see much of it, but it was very quiet, very quaint. And I believe the woman was wearing kimono, and I just saw them walking, and Dr. Mai was like, "That's a wedding," and I was like, "Oh, cool."
Yeah.
So,
and you said you also were able to witness a ritual dance at a Shinto shrine.
Yes.
Yeah. What was that like?
They're called kagora, and it's basically a dance to please the kami and petition for their blessings. So those were very, very lively, and there's music, and the shrine priestesses perform it. So
how many people? Just the priest is the only one doing the dance, or are there other?
It was several priestesses, and then many people surrounding. So it was pretty crowded.
Wow, that's really fascinating. I'm glad you got to witness both of those
cool,
things.
Yeah.
So Buddhism then, that was imported into this already existing kind of worldview through Korea. Was there anything different about the Buddhism that came to Japan that would distinguish it from, say, Buddhism in India or in China?
Well, it came as Mahayana Buddhism, which is the tradition that was in China. But I would say
that's the larger sect of Buddhism. Is that correct, or am I?
I believe so.
Yeah.
I think it's the second turning of the Dharma wheel. So it's like a continuation of Siddhartha's teachings,
Right. Okay.
or the original Buddhism. But yeah, that's predominantly what's in Japan, and there are several different sects, and different sects have interacted with politics and power differently throughout time. But I would say I do think that Pure Land Buddhism is the largest one now.
Did it come with a dose of Confucianism as well? Or?
Absolutely, yeah. That was part of the appeal, is that there was so much Chinese influence and knowledge with the tradition. So it kind of became very prestigious because of that, and that's how it originally became accepted.
So you get all this emphasis on familial duty and duty to state and so forth.
Absolutely.
Really interesting the way these traditions interact and come together in Japan. All right, well, you sent me some wonderful photographs, and I'd like to look at a few of them with you just to drive home some of the points you've been making. And I guess these are photographs that you took while you were on your trip, right? So we have a gorgeous temple here, ornate, gold leaf, right? You told me earlier this was a Buddhist temple.
It is.
And it's a little unusual, right? So
yes.
Tell me about this particular temple.
So this temple, I believe, was an emperor's retirement home, and it's really cool. Each level represents a different period of architecture. So the bottom is from one of the older periods, and I think the middle represents or resembles samurai dwellings, and then I believe the top is similar to how a Shinto temple shrine would look. But yeah, this temple was very controversial just because Buddhism traditionally is not very, out there and blingy, but it was very connected to power, and so this was truly a display of
There's usually an
political power.
Aesthetic quality to Buddhism right here, and you've got gold and ornate.
Right.
You said samurai.
Yes.
That's a Shinto tradition, right? The samurai tradition comes out of Shinto codes. Is that correct, or?
It was very aligned with a lot of Buddhist practices, just because of the idea of loyalty.
Okay.
I think I don't want to be incorrect. I think it was with Pure Land and Zen. It was Zen Buddhism.
So the idea
was
of
very connected.
loyalty, and this was picked up by soldiers, right? Loyalty to the state. Let's see the next photograph we have here. And that is a beautiful temple. Now this one, tell me about this one.
I think this one's called Kiyomizu-dera. This is in Kyoto. And it was just huge. I think this is the one where there was the dance going on.
So this is a Shinto shrine? Or
This was a Buddhist temple.
This is another Buddhist temple,
yes,
okay.
yeah. And there were shrines, it was like very large, like size of campus. And there were Shinto shrines within the temple, which was really interesting to see.
Yeah.
So, and there was still the purification.
So there were Shinto shrines within the Buddhist temple?
Yes, or like Shinto figures and statues of kami.
Okay. Let's see the next one here. That is beautiful, by the way.
Yeah.
This has got to be Shinto,
This is
right? Because
Shinto.
this is the sacred portal, the sacred entrance into the shrine. Okay.
Yeah, those are the torii gates, and this was there were 1,000 torii gates here. They were all donations, because donations are, for a donation of the torii gate is also like a petition to the kami for blessing.
Okay.
So there was a lot of them.
1,000?
I think it was 1,000.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Let's look at the next photograph here. And is this Shinto?
Yes.
Because the rope is significant. Is that correct? Is it? Yeah.
It marks off the sacred space. And the foxes, they're called katsuni. They represent Inari, which is the rice kami, who's one of the main kami, because rice and sake are very important. But she's just a kami of prosperity in general as well.
So if you were to come upon this on a street corner, you might invoke the I can't remember the name of the kami. You said the fox character.
Yeah.
For a good rice harvest or
just general prosperity. Yeah. It could be like to win the
sake.
lottery. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Let's look at the next picture here. Now, is this Jizo?
This is one of the statues of Jizo. This is called the Mizuko Jizo. Mizuko is the unborn, but there's a lot of miniaturized versions that they represent Jizo as the child and as the monk in the same figure. And these were really cool. They were on Miyajima Island, and there were a lot of them.
So he's depicted here as an infant.
Yes.
So this is focusing on Jizo's power to protect the unborn and babies.
Definitely, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
He looks like a bratty little kid.
I know.
So let's
They
look
were
at
so
the next.
feisty.
Yeah, that's all. And this is Jizo.
This was Jizo as well. This was in Hiroshima. An atom bomb actually had hit this statue.
Oh my goodness.
And this was like very powerful to see. But yeah, the red bib and the hat represent protection. And this is honestly when I got really curious about him, because I was wondering kind of his role in, tragic events and
You were seeing
coping
these
with
things
death.
all over the place. So when you see a red bib and a red hat, you know it's Jizo.
Yes.
And you know that symbolizes protection in general. Okay. That's really interesting. All right, let's look at the next photo. I love this one. Because this is, if this were a Christian statue, it would be Madonna and Child.
Yeah.
It would be Mary and the baby Jesus. But obviously it's not. It's still Madonna and Child. But this represents protection for infants, the unborn, and the mother. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. This one was in Tokyo as well. I believe this statue is by a memorial for, I think it was something with the school where it had caught fire or something, and a lot of children had died. So this was near some memorial. So
yeah, it's really lovely. And while we have this one here, can you talk a little bit more about Jizo's protective role over women? Because in your paper, and I thought this was very insightful, you talked about Jizo actually liberating women in a certain way, and it has to do with pregnancy and birth and abortion and so forth. Can you fill us in a little bit on that?
Yeah, so I wrote a lot about when the abortion bans were going on. There was a lot of cults to Jizo. Oh, I use the word cults loosely, but just a lot of women who made devotion to him, and they were able to continue petitioning for the safety of their child without having to worry about going against the law or being viewed negatively, just because he's also a figure for fertility. So he was just provided a source of comfort. And I recently listened to a podcast of a woman, modern day, who had a miscarriage many years ago, and she did a Jizo ritual in an organized temple, and just said it provided her so much comfort and allowed her to actually move past the miscarriage.
So it helps to her to have comfort about her unborn child that she lost in the miscarriage.
Yeah.
because Jizo would protect the child and guide it back into the cycle of samsara.
Exactly.
So it helps her move on then. It's really interesting that Jizo has that role, but also has the role of fertility,
Right.
kami, right, or bodhisattva. So a woman might petition to Jizo for a pregnancy and a successful pregnancy and birth. Is that the way that might work?
Absolutely.
Would Jizo play that role as well?
There's actually, I think there's over 100 Jizos, like iconography wise, and they all have different like functions and purposes. Like people will appeal to him for like, I have a headache, like please take it away. Like he's because he's all compassionate, you can go to him for anything, but those are definitely the more popular and like main concerns that he.
So the way you're describing Jizo as a kind of all compassionate, salvific figure.
Yes.
That sounds very Buddhist, right? Bodhisattva-like, right?
Absolutely.
So the Bodhisattva figure comes into Japanese culture and takes on the kami role. It's really quite lovely.
It's really interesting. Yeah.
Let's see what we have next. Now I don't know what this is. Maybe you can. It looks like a cemetery.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah. I found the cemeteries so interesting. Each little stupa is a family unit cremated, and you would often see like little Buddhist temples or shrines and then cemeteries, because Buddhism deals with death, because in Shinto death is very polluting, and that's not something they want to deal with the pollution of, and so it became the responsibility of Buddhism to deal with funerary services, which is partially why Jizo was so important in that development.
So if you were in Japan, you might have a Shinto wedding. You might have Shinto rituals to help one through the passages of life, but then at death you might turn to Buddhist rituals to provide the funerary rites and so forth.
Absolutely. There's a saying, it's a little joking, but people say you're born Shinto and you die Buddhist.
Oh, that's right. Well, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And they're all kind of organized around these life passages. Just one of the things, we talk about this all the time in religious studies, right? How religion helps us navigate the passages of life, and this illustrates it perfectly.
It does, yeah.
Well, I'm so proud of you,
you.
for going on this study abroad. And what's next for you now? You're actually studying religion in Japan right now. Is that correct?
I am, yes. I'm hopefully going to be doing some research on like evil in Buddhism and in the iconography, coming up with an independent study, and then presenting my research next week at Chapel Hill. So very excited.
Well, I'm going to be there. I'm giving a paper too, but I'm sure that mine's not nearly as interesting as yours. But I look forward to hearing you present that.
You as well. Thank you.
And thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and we're so happy to still have you in the department for one more year. Glad you're not graduating right away.
Me too.
Thank you, Claire. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for Religion and Life for this week. I hope you'll join us again next time when we talk about Appalachian religious traditions. So from Japan to Appalachia, right here on App TV. Until then, this is Ozzie Ostwald.